Hello. Okay, this video is going to be about monotheism and the agenda of monotheism. So the agenda of monotheism is one God instead of many gods. It seems that the human being has been struggling with the idea of one God, with the idea of many gods. And the reason for that is superstition or imagination gone wild. So we have the serpent crawling through time. The two lines here represent time, and there's before Christ and after death or after Christ. So with Moses, Moses used the serpent to defeat the serpent of the Pharaoh, and what that symbolically to me represents is monotheism, or one God, or thou shalt have no other God before me, which came from the Ten Commandments. One God defeated the idea of many gods like Thoth or Osiris or Isis or Hubris or all the different Egyptian gods. So monotheism went head to head with, I think it's called polytheism or pantheism, I can't remember exactly, but it's many gods. The Egyptians had many gods. And then with Jesus bruised the head of the serpent, and his belief, backed by Jewish or Judaism of one God, defeated the idea of many gods in Rome and overtook Rome, or the Greek world, or the Italian world, or the Roman world. So Zeus, Apollo, the god of lightning, the god of the ocean, the god of all the different natural phenomenons that, or what were then phenomenons, was defeated by the idea of one God. And Jesus was a representative of one God, if not by some Christian believers that he was God. So let's talk a little bit about the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, there's prophets and kings that were anointed or chosen by God to convince the Hebrew people or the Jewish people or the Israelites that instead of worshiping many gods like Baal or whatever gods they were worshiping at the time that represented certain environmental occupations, this monotheism, or this agenda for monotheism, is interwoven into the Old Testament. So King David, King Solomon, I think King Saul, they were constantly trying to convince the Israelites to follow one God, Yahweh. So God anointed or sent or influenced or prophets said that this David will be king, and there's stories that surround around the struggle in between many gods and one God, and how this one God is jealous of not having the attention of the Israelites. It's apparent that there's an agenda to have one God. So why would we want one God, or why would society or civilization or the development of civilization want one God? I'll explain that in a bit through Christ or Jesus. So it's obvious that throughout the Old Testament there's a struggle between monotheism and many gods. And the thing is with Moses, there were some rules set down and there were some protocols set down as to how to approach this monotheistic God. And the Old Testament is basically a struggle of legalism, of sacrifice, of protocol, of developing into a society or a civilization that has one focus, one direction. So instead of going with the wind god or the earth god or all these different gods that are associated to the Asiatic world, the Hebrews or the Jewish people, through environmental influences, seem to focus on the idea of one God and build on one God. Now, I'm not a scholar, I'm just a guy that's trying to figure this out. So, a lot of the drama in the Old Testament and a lot of the drama throughout that part of the world surrounds around the family or nepotism. And I've associated the serpent to nepotism. So in between BC and AD, there was a lot of people that wanted to conserve the gods, or conservatism. Like we have conservative Christians today. Back then they had conservative Greek mythology, they had conservative Egyptian mythology, they had conservative Babylonian mythology. So there's always been a resistance towards any type of change that would influence the nepotism of a family, a royal family, or a carpenter family, or a farming family. And it could be oligarchy, it could be the elite. So there's a struggle with the many gods. Now, considering what I said, with conserving many gods, or conserving the way of life, and not accepting one direction that is above all other gods, we have people that have been anointed to represent this one God, and the greatness of that one God is proved over and over again, supposedly through the Bible or the Old Testament. So, if David and King Solomon and all these prophets and stuff like that were anointed and still having little effect over the agenda of monotheism as it's associated to the Jewish people or the Israelites or these people, what happens is we have Jesus, and Jesus bruised the head of the serpent. Moses defeated the serpent of the Pharaoh. So we have the idea of one God again. Now with Jesus, he is sent as God, or a representation of God, or as God. So if he's sent as God, how does this cement monotheism? How does this make monotheism more concrete? Well, it could be associated to, instead of having all these protocols that are associated to the wind or the earth or the stars or the sun or Jupiter or all these Roman gods or all these different gods. Now, considering a medicine man back then, a medicine man wanted to perform medicine, and he wasn't able to perform medicine, and he would have to take out someone's tonsils or someone's appendix or give someone treatment for a headache or something like that, and he'd have to go through the protocols of superstition, and in these going through these protocols of superstition, he'd have to have 3 virgins sing to the moon, while an old lady rolled some fish bones, and a tarot card was read, and astrology was. So he'd have to go through this bureaucracy of superstition in order to perform medicine. Now, if there is an agenda for monotheism, it's reasonable to assume that Jesus played a pivotal role in, or a turning point partly for forgiveness and tolerance for human error, as an evolutionary turning point for humanity. That's why Christ is probably so popular, is because you can make errors and you won't be punished harshly by the conservatisms of the many gods or the protocols of superstition. So if a doctor or a medicine man back then had a god that was primarily focused with human health and wellness, this could be seen as an agenda to improve humanity, and their focus on how to approach the environment of Earth and the environment of the universe. So if a doctor doesn't want to go through the protocols of a virgin singing to the moon and an old woman rolling the bones, or some type of superstition in order to perform medicine, a doctor can come in, or doctors can come in and say, if Jesus was here, he would heal you. But because he's not here, me and my colleagues are going to cut you. We're going to perform surgery on you. But we believe in Jesus, so Jesus has got our back, and we're performing God's work, or Jesus' work, or the monotheism's work. Now, I believe that monotheism is associated to the medical world, because they couldn't adhere to all the different protocols, superstitious protocols that were associated to the time. Now, having said that, because progress is slow and technology was not as readily available for the people, like a cell phone or a computer or a television or a car or anything like that. These people had all this spare time, and they would be focused on working and just thinking about superstition and being awed by the mysticism of superstition. Like Ares, the god of war. Oh, Ares is calling for war. So having one god opened up the door for humanity to say that they want to get to know God better, so they study weather, as weather is under God. They want to get to know medicine better, so they study medicine as it's associated to God. So monotheism can be associated generally to moving away from the superstitions of the old world and developing psychology, developing biology, developing, now at the same time that there were still some rigid rules associated to pursuing science and philosophy, but it opened up the door for humanity to move away from complicated superstition, very complicated superstition. So if the agenda of monotheism is to focus humanity on one direction, and that everything on the earth is associated to one God, then we're studying what is called creation. I like to call it the cause and effect of what occupies space. So if God, or the idea of one God, or monotheism, is an agenda, it can be associated to Moses breaking the rules, Jesus breaking the rules, and part of the problem is, or part of the reality is that the Egyptians wanted to rule, the Romans wanted to rule, and by having one God has the rules, the Ten Commandments, for example, in this situation that I'm talking about. So, I know I'm stumbling a bit through this. The reason why monotheism is so important and um, conservatism so important is it seems that we have been trying to hold on to our well-being and welfare and prosperity throughout the ages. And every time something new comes along that moves us in a new direction, there's generally unrest, like war and stuff like that. So right now in the world, a lot of people are struggling with all these different gods, like the Muslim God. The First Nations are struggling with their monotheistic belief and believing in what they believe, with the overpowering nature of Christianity and Muslims causing a lot of havoc and problems in the world right now. So you have these people that have established prosperity, and they want to conserve the isms. They were like a white male elder conservative Christian. They don't want to consider where science has brought us, but at the same time, monotheism has played a big influence on separating us from superstition and focusing us on the material universe. So if everything is made of God or one God, we can look at the ocean, we can look at the starfish, we can look at the water horse, we can look at the bonobo monkey, we can look at science. And the thing is that there's conservatisms that said the world is flat. There's conservatisms that said that gravity is not influential. That we're living in a macroscopic or a digestive naked eye perspective of just what we are. So the microscopic universe changed how we see things. So what I'm trying to express here is that we're moving in one direction. The Muslims want to go in a direction, the Hindus want to go in a direction, the Sikhs want to go into a direction, the Buddhists want to go into a direction. Now can you imagine back when Jesus existed or Moses existed, all these different directions, and it's like, which one is the proper direction to get the most intellectual understanding of the material universe and progress in a healthy way? So right now we're at a turning point where the idea of one God or monotheism has provided a direction for the rise of Western civilization. So in that direction, it seems that we have accomplished a lot under the idea of one God and not being distracted by multiple superstitions. So if the doctors pray to Jesus, I believe in Jesus. Now doctors are not doing that anymore, but I'm pretty sure back in the dark ages doctors were doing that. So yeah, the serpent is crawling through time, and one of the main things is conserving nepotism. And in conserving nepotism, you have a struggle with new ideas or new directions. And right now, the monotheism has become so powerful and so influential that people don't say, do you believe in gods? Do you believe in all these different gods? And it's like, instead it's like, do you believe in God? And then there's this debunking activity that's associated to God or monotheism. So asking if you believe in God is difficult for humanity, and the reason why it's difficult for humanity is because people are no longer adhering to the direction of the Bible or the Quran or the Book of the Dead or smaller religions. So yeah, we're moving in one direction, and this is just money. Money is associated to moving away from um, nepotistic money or old money to new innovation, new discoveries. And as people discover more and more, we discover that um, we might have made up the idea of God. And if we made up the idea of God, then that would make us God. So we really need to have a conversation about something like this, for example. That's all I'm trying to express with this is we need to move in a direction, and I believe that the future is diversity. And if the future is diversity, then we need to make the earth a cosmopolitan of human diversity. Maybe one government. Um, Maybe one global government, because world domination has been a big part of monotheism. This has been dedicated to the empowerment of the Red Road and keeping your home fires strong.